Hello, Gina Piscatelli here again with online lecture number 3 for the circulatory system. In this lecture, we'll talk about special routes that blood takes. These are called specialized blood vessel circuits. And the readings include chapter 18 and 19, very specific pages for the pulmonary and the systemic circuits shown here. We'll also talk about the coronary circuit, which is really just part of the systemic circuit. That's in chapter 18 on 2 pages. Then we'll look at 2 new circuitries that you haven't been introduced to at all yet. One has to do with the liver. It's called the Hepatic Portal System. That's in chapter 19 on page 748. And we'll look at 3 aspects of fetal circulation that are different than the regular systemic circuitry of artery, capillary, vein route. That's in chapter 28 on page 1091. So this is our outline. First, I'll review systemic circulation with you, and then I'll go through the specialized circuits or the features of certain routes of blood flow. One you've already learned about, and that's the pulmonary circuitry. The second will be a feature of the coronary circulation, and that feature is called an anastomosis. Then, as I mentioned previously, we'll talk about a portal system and a few things about circulation in the fetus. So first, I'd like to review the systemic circuit, the path that blood flows in vessels of the systemic circuit. The heart pumps oxygenated blood into arteries, so arteries carry oxygen-rich blood. That blood, shown in this diagram, comes to the kidney in the renal artery, which diverges into small capillary beds throughout the tissue of the kidney. Blood will return to the heart from those capillary beds in veins, and small veins will converge or merge together into larger veins. This is the renal vein in this diagram, which will empty into the inferior vena cava and make its way back to the heart. Veins, therefore, are carrying oxygen-poor blood. So that's the basic circuitry for the systemic system, the body, right? So arteries, capillaries to veins. In the pulmonary circuit, we have the same system. Pulmonary artery carries blood from the heart to the lungs, and then veins return the blood from the lungs to the heart. But in this case, it's not the artery that has oxygenated blood. In the pulmonary circuit, the pulmonary artery carries oxygen-poor blood, and the pulmonary vein carries oxygen-rich blood because the lungs have oxygenated the blood before it returns to the heart. So that's the difference in the pulmonary circuit, is that an artery and a vein, they don't carry the same level of oxygenated blood as in the systemic circuit. The coronary circulation, that is, the blood supply or vessels that supply blood to the heart tissue. Coronary circulation is really a subdivision of the systemic circulation. 5% of the total volume of your blood is always supplying the heart with blood, heart tissue. These blood vessels include, again, arteries, capillaries, and veins. And the route that blood takes is that the left ventricle pumps blood into the aorta, and then this oxygenated blood travels in coronary arteries that branch off of that base of the aorta that I'm kind of circling right here. Those are called coronary arteries. The blood travels into capillary beds that perfuse the myocardium, and oxygen is delivered, carbon dioxide is picked up, and now the blue vessels, the veins, merge together into a coronary sinus, which is on the posterior surface of the heart. That coronary sinus will then deliver the deoxygenated blood into the right atrium, just like the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava do. So this is a picture of the coronary circulation from the anterior view. This is a picture of the coronary circulation from the posterior view. I have typed my notes here so that you can kind of see them a little bit better. Just fix it for you. There you go. Okay, so the coronary circulation, there's two important arteries that branch off the aorta, the left coronary artery and the right coronary artery. In lab, you will learn two major branches of each one of those coronary arteries. And on the back, you can see how veins converge into this sac-like structure on the posterior surface of the heart called the coronary sinus. From here, blood enters the right atrium. So that's coronary circulation. It's not that different than systemic. What is different is the number of capillary beds and arterioles that supply one region of the heart. These connections between blood vessels are called anastomoses. So these are arterial anastomoses that are shown here. Notice that you've got one coronary artery coming on the bottom here, then you've got another coronary artery in the top, and see how these arteries merge together. So both the posterior and the anterior coronary artery can supply the same part of the heart muscle. That's called an anastomosis. Communication between any two tubes really is an anastomosis. So the coronary circulation has several anastomoses. This is particularly important because it provides protection in case there's some sort of an obstruction, which is shown in the picture below. Here we have a vessel that's been obstructed, so oxygenated blood would not reach this part of the tissue unless there were anastomoses or other vessels, collateral circulation it's sometimes called, that also supply that region of the heart. So the idea of anastomoses and talking about coronary circulation brings up some issues that are very common in the healthcare environment or the clinical environment, and that is ischemia, myocardial infarction, and angina pectoris. These are just three terms that you should be familiar with. Ischemia is defined as insufficient blood flow to a tissue, producing therefore a lack of oxygen. Blood flow and perfusion kind of mean the same thing. So ischemia is insufficient perfusion to a tissue. A myocardial infarction is a region or an infarct of tissue death. And another name for tissue death is necrosis. And this necrosis is due to long-term ischemia. So a myocardial infarction means that the heart has an infarct or an area of necrosis because ischemia has occurred in a certain region. One of the symptoms of a myocardial infarction is angina pectoris. Angina pectoris is chest pain, and it's thought to be due to the lack of oxygen that causes then lactic acid buildup. It's also probably due to some constriction of chest muscles, blood vessels, and the heart as well. Okay, let's talk about our third specialized blood vessel circuit, and that is a portal system. A portal system, or the portal systems that we're going to look at, are also part of the systemic circulation. How it differs is that a portal system contains two capillary beds that are connected by a vessel called a portal vein. So blood is going to leave the heart in an artery or multiple arteries and travel to an organ where the artery branches into small capillaries and diffusion can take place in the capillary bed. Then these capillaries merge into a vein. This is called a portal vein before they diverge again into another capillary bed. This provides another location for diffusion to occur. I'll show you why that's important in just a second. And so this second capillary bed is a site of diffusion. The capillaries will merge once again, forming a vein that does return to the heart. So this picture that you're looking at here contrasts the regular systemic circuitry with the circuitry in a portal system. So there's only one capillary bed usually between when the blood leaves the heart and then returns to the heart. In a portal system, the blood leaves the heart, goes through two capillary beds, and then returns. You really have seen one portal system already in A&P 1. It was called the Hypophyseal Portal System. In this circuit, oxygenated blood travels away from the heart in capillaries or in arteries to capillaries, and these capillaries are in the hypothalamus. So this is the region of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus produces hormones. Those hormones then can diffuse into the capillary bed and will travel wherever the blood goes next. And where it goes is these capillaries merge into a portal vein that runs in the infundibulum. So this is the hypophyseal portal system right here. And then diverge again into another capillary bed. At this site, the hypothalamic hormones that traveled from the hypothalamus down to this capillary bed, which is around and in the anterior pituitary gland, allows those hormones to diffuse out of the capillary bed. Also, the anterior pituitary hormones can enter the bloodstream at this location. So hypothalamic hormones are dropped off, anterior pituitary hormones are picked up, and then the venous system will carry the blood back to the heart. The new portal system that I'd like to introduce you to is called the Hepatic Portal System. We will encounter this when we talk about the digestive system, so I thought we'd just cover it now while we're doing blood vessels. So the heart's up here somewhere. It's not on the diagram. Oxygenated blood leaves the heart and aorta, travels down into the abdomen, the aorta does. And one branch of the aorta is called the mesenteric artery. The mesenteric artery supplies blood to the intestine. And the intestine is where all of our digestive processes take place. So capillary beds surround the intestine so that our nutrients can be absorbed. Nutrients are absorbed into the capillaries, and the capillaries normally would go into veins and go right back up to the heart. But what happens is, first, this vein forms another capillary bed in the liver. And here, the liver can actually take up many essential nutrients from the blood. Things like fatty acids, amino acids, glucose to store as glycogen. Because the liver has to make clotting factors. It makes a host of important molecules for the rest of the body. So it gets first stab at all the nutrients you absorb from the intestine. From here, the blood then continues in a regular venous system going back to the heart. And the vein from the liver to the inferior vena cava is called the hepatic vein. Here's another picture of the hepatic portal system. It shows the hepatic portal vein much more clearly. It does not have the arterial system. So it's focusing mainly on digestion. So the products of digestion are absorbed from the intestine into the capillaries. Now that blood carrying all those nutrients will travel in the portal vein to the liver. And here, the liver can monitor what's in the blood and take up whatever it needs to store, or maybe it needs to use amino acids to make certain proteins. The rest of the nutrients will pass into the hepatic vein and go into the regular systemic circuitry and go back to the heart. Okay, our last specialized blood circuitry occurs in the fetus. So collectively, these features I'm going to show you are just called aspects of fetal circulation. We're going to look at 3 total specializations in fetal circulation. One has to do with the vessels in the umbilical cord, and the other 2 are shunts that allow blood to bypass certain organs. So first, let's deal with vessels in the umbilical cord. In the umbilical cord, there is blood exchanged between the fetus, the placenta, and the mother. So the umbilical artery is traveling from the fetus, carrying oxygen-poor blood back to the placenta. But the umbilical vein carries oxygen-rich blood from the placenta to the fetus. Understand this a little bit better. Let's look at this diagram, and I'll show you these notes in a second. As a fetus develops, its oxygenated blood is going to come from mom's heart and lungs. So here's mom's heart over here, and she has an aorta. The aorta travels down to the abdomen, and a branch is given off, okay? And the branch, one branch goes to the uterus and will go to the placenta. So oxygenated blood reaches the placenta. Then the umbilicus connects the placenta with this developing fetus. Now I know this doesn't look like a fetus, haha, but it's the internal organs of a fetus. So this is the umbilical cord right here, and within it is an umbilical artery and an umbilical vein. The umbilical vein is called a vein in relation to the fetus's circulation because it is carrying blood back to or directly to the fetus's heart, not away from its heart, but to its heart. So this is an umbilical vein right here, and it came from the placenta, so it's carrying oxygen-rich blood. That umbilical vein will then enter the inferior vena cava and get dumped into the right atrium, and then it'll go through the regular circuitry of the heart, come out the fetus's aorta, and eventually will travel in an umbilical artery that goes to the umbilical cord. Now, by this time, the blood has lost most of its oxygen. Even though it's an artery taking blood away from the fetus's heart, it's carrying oxygen-poor blood. Okay, let me show you these notes a little bit. So the umbilical vein that's shown in the diagram, that's the red vessel, and it's labeled number 2 up here. The umbilical artery is the pink vessel right here, and it's labeled number 6. The umbilical vein carries oxygen-rich blood. The umbilical artery carries oxygen-poor blood. It's like the pulmonary circuit in that sense, that artery and vein are not matched with oxygen content of the blood. Okay, there's also one other aspect to fetal circulation that's important, and that is shunts. Shunts are vessels that allow blood to bypass capillary beds, and these shunts are located in the fetus liver and the fetus lungs. The liver shunt is called the ductus venosus, and the shunts that bypass the lungs are called the ductus arteriosus and the foramen ovale. And we're going to look at both of those anatomically and functionally. Now, the reason it's important, these shunts are important, is because the fetal liver and the fetal lungs aren't fully developed or functional yet. So it's best to send blood to areas that need the oxygen the most. The liver and the lungs will receive some oxygenated blood so that they can grow, develop, perform mitosis. But the lungs aren't going to oxygenate blood, and the liver isn't going to be making proteins, plasma proteins, clotting factors, not yet anyway. So it will receive blood after birth, more blood after birth. Okay, let's first look at how blood bypasses the liver. We're just going to trace the pathway. Oxygen-rich blood has come from the umbilical vein, or through the umbilical vein from the placenta. It first, before it enters the inferior vena cava, it will actually go through the liver, and some capillaries will branch off of this umbilical vein. So the liver will receive some blood. The majority of the blood, however, bypasses liver tissue, no capillaries, and enters this structure, number 3, called the ductus venosus. That provides a connection between the umbilical vein and the inferior vena cava. So, blood entering the fetal heart is a mixture of this returning deoxygenated blood from the systemic circulation of the fetus, as well as oxygenated blood that comes from the placenta through the umbilical vein. And the liver does not deplete this oxygen level very much. The reason this looks purple right here is because it's a mixture of red and blue. So I'll just show you my notes for the ductus venosus. The ductus venosus allows the bypass of blood to hepatic capillaries. The umbilical vein, number 1, carries O2-rich blood. Some of that blood enters number 2, capillary beds in the liver. Most of the blood enters number 3, the ductus venosus. And that leads into number 4, the inferior vena cava. Okay, now there's 2 shunts that help the fetal heart bypass the pulmonary circuit entirely. So we're bypassing the lungs in this case. So if you recall, normally blood from the right atrium goes to the right ventricle and then out to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. Then blood returns in pulmonary veins to the left ventricle, left atrium, then left ventricle, then out the aorta. So we need to bypass this pulmonary system here, the pulmonary circuit. So there's 2 shunts. One is the foramen ovale, which is a hole or a foramen between the 2 atria. And the other is the ductus arteriosus, which is a vessel connecting the pulmonary artery with the aorta. So the way this shunt works is that blood returning to the heart in the inferior as well as superior vena cava still enters the right atrium, just like in the adult heart. But rather than pumping all that blood into the right ventricle to go to the pulmonary circuit, Most of the blood will cross directly over into the left atrium by going through the foramen ovale. Therefore, it enters the systemic circulation right away. Although some of the blood does get into the right ventricle when the right atrium contracts, not all of it's going to go through the foramen ovale and into the left atrium. So blood that does enter the right ventricle, the ventricle will contract, will enter the pulmonary artery. Well, we don't want all that blood to go to the lungs, so this shunt right here allows that blood to directly enter the aorta. So it'll go to the systemic circulation. So this is just a bit of nomenclature, or I guess a numerical way to look at how blood bypasses the fetal lungs. You start in number 1, the right atrium. The right atrium contracts. So does the left atrium at the same time, of course. But blood in the right atrium is going to go one of 2 ways, either through the foramen ovale or into the right ventricle. Most of it goes into the foramen ovale and therefore enters the left atrium. Then when it goes to the left atrium, it enters the left ventricle, and the ventricles both contract. The left ventricle will send blood out the aorta. Any blood that entered the right ventricle, when the ventricles contract, will enter this number 7, the pulmonary artery, but we don't want that to go to the lungs, so the ductus arteriosus number 8 provides a connection directly to the aorta. So those are all the specialized blood vessel circuits that we're going to look at in our circulatory system unit. Let's look at some review questions. They're just a continuation of the other review questions from the other lectures, so that's how they're numbered. I'll read them to you. Number 8 says, an artery is defined as what? A, B, C, D, or E? A blood vessel that returns blood to the heart, a blood vessel that carries O2-rich blood, a blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart, or some combination of those 3, either A and B or B and C. We'll look at the answer in just a second. Number 9 says the arterial coronary circulation has extensive something that help prevent something of myocardial tissue. So I'm asking you, what does the arterial coronary circulation have that's specialized? A, portal vessels, B, shunts, or C, anastomoses? And I'm hoping that you picked the right one, but then let's look at the second part. One of those 3 helps prevent something in myocardial tissue. Does a portal vessel help prevent necrosis of the myocardial tissue? Or B, does a shunt help prevent ischemia in myocardial tissue? Or C, does anastomoses help prevent ischemia of myocardial tissue? Again, we'll look at the answer in a second. Number 10 says, what do the umbilical veins and the pulmonary veins have in common? Wow. So the answer is written there for you. I never erased it. There it is. Oops. They both carry O2-rich blood. Number 11 says, what's the function of the ductus venosus? Well, a duct is a shunt. So we're going to shunt blood away from something. And again, I've got the answer written right here. Shunt blood away from the liver, capillary beds in the liver. Number 12 asks, what's the function of the ductus arteriosus and the foramen ovale? They both shunt blood away from pulmonary capillary beds. So let's just check the answers of 8 and 9. Hopefully you got these right. 8 is only C, a blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart. And number 9, the answer is anastomoses. The coronary circulation has anastomoses that help prevent ischemia of myocardial tissue. Thank you. That's all.